He has changed the way he's looked at a number of things. He's adjusted the way he's looked at the South Asia strategy, Afghanistan. He's very definitely changed his attitudes towards the DACA issue, and even the wall. He has evolved in the way he's looked at things.
White House Chief of Staff John Kelly on special report last night talking about how his boss, the president, has evolved from his views on the campaign trail to the Oval Office. The president today disputing that his views have changed, especially when it comes to building the border wall. The debate over immigration reaching a boiling point tonight as Senate Democrats vow to hold the line on DACA, hoping to force Republicans to deal on that or face a government shutdown. U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions joins us now with the latest from the Trump administration on immigration, the president, and much more. Mr. Attorney General, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Shannon.
Okay, listen, you were one of the very first people from the Hill, one of the first senators ever to be out on the campaign trail with the president. Immigration was something the two of you talked about quite a bit. You seemed in lockstep on many of these issues. Do you agree with this assessment that he's evolved as he's gotten more information or more of the realities of Washington about what you can or can't get done?
Well, we all change and we learn something as we go forward, but his principles on immigration have not changed. He favored the wall. He's fought for it all the way through the campaign and in Congress. And he never said it was going to go from coast to coast. He never said every single inch of the border had to have a wall on it. So I think he's been quite consistent on that. What he is committed to do is to end the illegality in the system and to create a system of immigration that serves the national interest. It puts American interests first.
Okay, so today the president was he had very nice things to say about General Kelly. He praised him quite a bit, but we're told behind the scenes there was definitely some friction about the president being unhappy about the way that maybe the words that were used to describe how he's dealt with these issues. You've had a little bit of doghouse from the president before. What's it like to be in such a prominent position in the administration and to feel like maybe you have things to smooth over with the president?
The president says what he thinks. If he's unhappy with you, he lets people know he's unhappy with you. But General Kelly is a national treasure. What he's doing to help President Trump is really remarkable. He's provided leadership that's almost, to me, I'm not sure anybody else could have done as well as he. And I totally am supportive of General Kelly and a great personal admirer. He's got great integrity. He does not believe in shysters coming in and manipulating the administration. He spots them right off the bat. So he is a great American.
Okay, let's talk about the various immigration proposals now floating around the Hill. Obviously, the one that came to the president from Senators Graham and Durbin, a bipartisan effort on the Senate side, was not well received. He said it was horrible. It's not what he campaigned on. He was not happy about that. It is so different in many ways from the House version coming from Chairman Goodlatte and others over there. How in the world do you see the two sides, both the parties and the houses, coming together to get something done?
The bill that works is the Goodlatte proposal. It may not be perfect, but it will actually work and do the things that President Trump has talked about doing. Unfortunately, the Durbin bill is just not going to work. It's the same thing we've seen before. The Senate is often prepared to vote for bills as long as they don't work. You produce a bill that would actually effectively end illegality, and that's all we're talking about. Who is in favor of illegal immigration? Is there anybody? Why keep defending it? Why keep blocking the laws that help end it? Why don't we create a system that has no illegality, that brings in people legally, and that we vet them and make sure they're not criminals, that they're not people who are going to be unable to function in this highly technical society? I think that is the right thing to do morally, legally, and as a matter of public policy.
You ask whether there are people who are for illegal immigration. So let's talk about this issue of local leaders who essentially declare sanctuary cities, or in California, sanctuary states, where they say they will not cooperate with the federal government, federal agencies in rooting out people who may be here illegally. The mayor of Oakland now saying she's happy to go to jail over it. There's this discussion on the Hill this week with DHS Secretary Nielsen about whether the administration would consider going after leaders who are protecting people who are here illegally and refusing to cooperate with the feds on that.
Look, it's unthinkable to me that somebody who breaks into our country, hauls, let's say, cocaine to Oakland, California, and is arrested 3 days later, and the city of Oakland is going to try to protect that person from being deported. What kind of logic is this? It's so unacceptable. It is an affirmation of illegality. It's an actual protection of illegality. And I'm not saying what is legal and not legal. I'm saying as a matter of policy, it's unthinkable to me that we would have public officials take that view.
Well, you know she's not alone. There are many out there who are vowing to do the same thing. And in California, there are several reports about potential ICE raids there of gathering up to 1,500 people who either are set for deportation, they have final orders, they've committed a specific crime, those kinds of things. But you have now California lawmakers saying this. This two senators from California authoring a letter, Senators Feinstein and Harris, saying, "We firmly believe that law enforcement must prioritize dangerous criminals, not undocumented immigrants who do not pose a threat to public safety. Diverting resources in an effort to punish California and score political points is an aberrant abuse of power, not to mention a terrible misuse of scarce resources."
It's not an attack on California. How could that possibly be? People who enter the country unlawfully are subject to being deported. A country unwilling to deport unlawful entrants is a country that's not serious about enforcing its border. That's what this election was about. And I think that we're in a position to make tremendous progress. We are in a position to dramatically reduce the illegality. And we are receiving large numbers of the criminal element in this illegal flow. We can make America safer. We can make America more prosperous. We can help bring people to the country who will flourish here and do well here. And it's just common sense to me.
What do you make of comments by DHS Secretary Nielsen saying that essentially folks from DACA, even if their grants to be here, their permission to be here for now, lapses at some point, as long as they're not committing a crime, they're not going to be an ICE priority for deportation? Is that something that you agree with? Do you think that lines up with the president's goals? Well,
ICE has to set priorities. Certainly, we all agree that people who come here illegally and then commit a crime while they're here should be the top priority, for example. And there are other priorities you would set within that, too. So that's the Department of Homeland Security has a limited number of resources, and they certainly should set priorities. But nobody in the government can declare somebody legally here, in my opinion, who Congress has said is illegally here.
Very quickly, I got to ask you, how is this job different than maybe you thought it would be, or is it what you expected?
It's a bottomless pit. You know, I tease my Senate friends. I said, this is a real job. I have to work 7 days a week, 12-hour days. But it's so much fun, and I think we're making some real progress. We've got some great people in the department, some great agents throughout the country, and it's an honor to be able to lead them.
Well, Mr. Attorney General, great to have you with us on Fox News at Night. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.